The opposition there today, with the Conservatives laying out why they're voting against the government's 2-month GST holiday, and the NDP making the case, rather, for support. We'll take a live look inside the House of Commons as the Liberals are aiming to get that tax holiday through Parliament in time to start on December 14th. There will likely be a vote much later tonight. Today's vote is just one piece, though, of the affordability package the government announced a week ago. The other part, $250 rebate checks for workers who earn under $150,000 in 2023. That part has yet to be introduced in the House. It was kept out of the bill tabled this week after the NDP announced they'd only support it if it was expanded to include seniors and students who aren't working, as well as people with disabilities. The feds have yet to take a clear stance on that. So what happens next? Let's bring in the front bench. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is here. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Former Alberta MLA and Cabinet Minister Gary Mar is here. He's the president and CEO now of the Canada West Foundation. Former Manitoba Premier and Canadian Ambassador to the U.S., Gary Dewar, is with us. He's now a senior business advisor at Dentons. And the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie rounds us out tonight. Hi, everybody. Really nice to see you. Christy, I'll start with you. Let's start at it from the federal government's perspective. What do you think they hope this measure accomplishes for them from a strategic perspective, and do you think it will?
Well, I would say they have accomplished the goal that they likely set for this, which is breaking through and making finally, getting some feedback, some positive feedback from people with respect to economic proposals that they've made. So, it's sort of broken through all that noise. It's got people talking about Liberals and the economy and all that. So that has been, I think, a success for them. Whether or not it's easy to break through, possible to break through, and whether or not these policies are exactly the right ones for Canada are, I think, still going to continue to be debated. I mean, we've seen one of the downsides of it, I think, is for small business in particular, where you run a small business, you run a home hardware dealership, you've got to figure out, well, how do I put a different price on this item versus this item that are very similar. And in the middle of a holiday rush, it's going to be really difficult for lots of people to implement, and small business in particular. It is, though, hard to criticize any government that's trying to come up with ways to save people money around the holiday season. I know there are lots of criticisms. It's not long enough. It's not good enough. It's not big enough. We didn't have enough lead time. But at the end of the day, it is still a break for people who are really looking for a lot of, for every opportunity to try and save some money around Christmas.
Yeah, I think Christy hits the nail on the head, Rob, insofar as I don't know what the whole debate looks like, and I certainly hear a lot of pushback, but people are talking about it. I was saying I went to like a comedy show on the weekend, and all these small business owners were in and around us, and they were all like, people were actually talking about something political other than Donald Trump, and it was actually happening in our parliament. So that part I think is accomplished, but does it benefit, does the debate that then ensues benefit the federal government going forward, do you think?
I mean, Vassy, I don't know if the Liberals will benefit in the polls from this, and clearly that was part of the intention. But I do know that the most powerful Conservative in the country, Premier Doug Ford, the progressive Conservative Premier here in Ontario, his government has embraced it. They kind of have no choice because it's a harmonized sales tax. But Peter Bethlenfalvy, the provincial treasurer here, said today it's going to cost about $1 billion there. But they believe that relief for Canadians is important, and they're happy to match it because they're happy to get in kind of in the windstream of that, because it's good for them politically, they think. And that's why I think I was a bit surprised that Mr. Poilievre isn't voting for this. I could understand the $250 check piece, but if your whole mantra has been axe the tax because you don't like the carbon tax, which is a consumption tax of a kind, why would you then vote against a tax holiday on a consumption tax?
Gary Mar, let me jump over to you on that point, because Rob makes an interesting point about the approach from one Conservative Premier, Doug Ford, versus the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre. We played the clip of how he explained the way that his party intends to vote on this, against it, basically because they see it as a trick, as he described, and inflationary. What's your view on that?
Well, I think it will be inflationary, and moreover, it will add to the national debt. If you, the GST has been observed to be, it should be renamed, not the goods and sales tax, but the debt servicing tax. If you look up the amount of money that's raised by the GST in the federal budget, it's somewhere between $50 and $60 billion a year. If you look at how much it costs to service our debt, it's about $50 or $60 billion a year. So every dollar from the GST ends up going into paying off our debt interest, and now we're going to add more to the debt. It's not really a policy. It does appear to be a short-term measure. Christy makes a really great point about how challenging this is going to be for a business to figure out what their inventory is going to be covered, what's not going to be covered. And imagine this. Imagine being, say, a company that sells toys, a store that sells toys, and there's an exemption. So what do you do in terms of your inventory? Are people going to hold off waiting until the 15th of December before they go out and buy their toys? What does that mean in terms of the predictability of your sales if you're a retailer? This is going to cause a good deal of difficulty for the people that have to actually institute the tax change. And then, the Bank of Canada might, instead of, lowering the interest rate by half a point, they might only lower it by a quarter of a point because they're afraid of the inflationary effect of reducing the GST and the increased spending as a result of it. I don't think it's a very good policy. Axing the tax on the carbon tax would be a more significant thing to do that actually is a lot easier to implement if you're going to get rid of a value-added consumer tax.
And I certainly understand, Gary Dewar. I'll point to you like the conservative argument there. And I also understand, like, from the crass political point of view, they're so far out ahead of the Liberals. Maybe this is something that they can afford to do, right? But it is to Rob's point, it is interesting that the Conservatives have constantly talked about affordability and been out in the front on the issue of affordability all the time. And now they're going to say, well, this isn't, we're for relief for you, but not this type of relief.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting issue for them, the Conservatives. They don't want to appear to be heartless or be heartless, and because that would be one of their real weaknesses going into the election campaign. Having said that, a lot of people in Canada want a vision and a plan for the future of how we can get this economy growing again and how it can be fair for all Canadians. And I think in the medium term, they've got a heartless issue, but in the medium term and moving into the next election in February, when this thing expires, they've got the better, I'd rather play their set of cards than the other party's cards on this issue, because by February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, we're going to lose this benefit. I declared a conflict of interest last week about the GST on beer, so I just want to put that out there again, full disclosure. And but I think it's better on February 15th. I'd rather have the longer term removal of GST on housing and the removal of the carbon tax. I'd rather have the longer term plan. I think that's more salient going into the election campaign, which has got to take place before October of next year. So that's where I'd prefer to be. But they got to watch out they don't reinforce an image of being heartless. They want to have a brain, but they don't want to be perceived as heartless at the same time.
Okay. On that note, I'm going to take a quick break. We've got lots to talk about, as usual, it seems now every week, with what's going on with the incoming U.S. President Donald Trump, who, since the last time I saw everyone on this panel, has now threatened to impose, which I think Gary Dewar kind of predicted, a 25% tariff on all Canadian imports. We're going to talk about the consequences of that next with the panel.